a big chunk of my scientific work, my work as a scientist, is to try and figure out what is this meaning-making machinery, what is wisdom, how can we get a better understanding so we can cultivate it better, but also working with communities of practice, practitioners, leaders of these communities. I've done a lot of participant observation. I've done a lot of participant experimentation. I did Vervaeke Kelly's Return to the Source last July.
Is that a series? Is that a...
you go out, and it's an ecology of practice, evolve, move, play. He's been very influenced first by Jordan Peterson's work, and then more so, more recently, and I think you would say more in depth by my work.
And we'll put links to all of these things that he's mentioning and talking about. We're going to put links to those in the information on YouTube, so you guys will be able to access these different things. Go on, sorry.
So you know, and what you have is you have
like say there's a father or mother out there, right? And they're in charge of their home, right? And they want to have a different future. They want their, you know, what do they do? What do they start to do, like as a person or as a leader of a home that can help?
Yeah. So good. Here's the answer. Sorry, I'm enthusiastic. Don't misread my energy for like, I know, like I hope I have.
No, look, we're waiting, John.
Okay. So like, and this comes from work I've done with Nathan Vanderpool and other people. Like I said, I've been in the room virtually or in person with all of the scientists when we're all sat in a room and what is wisdom? And we produced a consensus paper, and then to lots of participant observation, and we got a lot of the leaders of the community together in one room, and we did a bunch of discussion and practice. And I'm going to go to another one next week in France. Same thing, and so what's coming out of it is like there's sort of three dimensions you want to pay attention to. You want to pay attention to view, care, and action. You want to remember that framing. You want to really become aware of how you're framing, and you want to become really aware of that process of how you're assuming and assigning identities. Stop letting all of that go on mindlessly, automatically, reactively. You got to bring it more into your awareness, right? That's view. Care, reciprocal opening. You got to learn how to reciprocally open, how to,
what communicate, share information, accept information. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, but also reciprocally open. You need one of the defining features of wisdom is an ability to take other people's perspective in a way that makes a difference to how you're behaving.
I don't understand.
So, you and I, right? You can know as a set of facts, John's different. He thinks differently than me. But you can have this kind of moment. Let's say it's not me, where you go, oh, I thought she was angry, but she's actually afraid. You have to cultivate that kind of, Daniel Siegel calls it mindsight, like insight into other people's minds, and not just facts about their mind, but the ability to get their world and where they're coming from so that you can be responsive and responsible to it. You care. And then that automatically, those two, you can now see why they lead to the third thing, action. How are you interacting? And you want to be doing that so you can tune in to connections. How are you connected to yourself? How are you connected to other people? How are you connected to the world? And how are you connected to something ultimate that gives a verticality to your existence? And then you want to cultivate an ecology of practices in 4 domains. We call it DIME. You want dialogical practices, this dialectic into dialogos, and we run workshops on that, and there's a whole bunch. There's circling practices. This is all over the place. So people are trying to get back what's happening between you and I, where it takes on a life of its own. And we both get to a place we couldn't get to on our own, and it's emergent and it's transformative.
Yeah.
Then you want the imaginal. You have to, remember we talked about the experiment? You have to learn how to properly use your imagination again.
Yeah, that's disappearing, huh? It's almost an extinct animal, the imagination.
And we've also relegated it to something that where we're looking. I want to compare 2 different senses of imagination. One is the imaginary. This is Henri Corbin. He was a philosopher, and that's like when you picture something in your mind, like picture a sailboat.
Yeah.
And does it have, are the sails up or down?
It's in a shop.
Okay, so there you go. Now that's one thing. Now I want you to consider that in comparison to this. So a kid picks up a stick, ties a blanket around them, and says, "I'm Zorro."
Mm-hmm.
They're not picturing anything in their mind. What they're doing is they're trying to take the perspective and the identity, the stuff we were talking about earlier, of Zorro. They're trying on what it's like to be Zorro in order to see if they can catch any of his virtues. That's serious play. That's what you do in ritual. You do that imaginally augmented awareness.
Yeah.
So when I'm teaching people Tai Chi, right, and they're novices, and you have to teach them how to inhabit their body differently. You say to them, okay, I want you to imagine you're standing in a shallow river and your knees to your feet are sinking into the mud. You want to have that sinking feeling there. Your knees to your navel are like the flowing water. You want this to feel like flowing water, right? And then from your navel up, this is like the air. You want it to feel as insubstantial as possible. And when people are doing that, they're imaginally augmenting so they can become aware of very subtle patterns, sensory motor patterns that they would otherwise be unaware of, and they can re-inhabit themselves in a new way. And a new possibility, a new developmental pathway opens for them. That's the imaginal. You have to, and that's what ritual properly does, right? So you need the dialogical, you need the imaginal, you need mindfulness practices, you need meditative practices and contemplative practices. They're not the same thing. You need seated versions, you need moving versions. You got to create that ecology, right? And then you need embodiment in practices. You need practices that involve you, right, knowing through your body, being embedded in your environment, negotiating with the world. So Rafe, Kelly, you evolve, move, play. You do parkour in the wilderness. So you get nature connection and you're also moving your body and having it be challenged. So it's not a postcard that you sit back like a Monet painting. Oh, isn't that lovely? I just really like. No, it's challenging you. It's forcing you to transcend. When I was there, I'm like 60 and I'm there with all these 20 somethings, right? And like, right. And I talked about every day you went to the horizon of horror. They're so good at like taking you to this place where it's like, oh, I'm really scared. I made a vow to myself. I said, no matter what it is, there's a couple things I can't do because of my veneers. And I said, other than those things, anything that's presented to me, I'm going to do it. And the more afraid I am, the more I'm going to do it.
Oh yeah. I did that today. I got in the ice. I have an ice bath here and I got in. I didn't really want to, but I was like, I need something. I just want to alter. I just want to challenge my perception today.
Yeah.
I want to do something I don't want to do. It's something small, but it's like doing that thing that you don't want to do or putting yourself up, just committing to it, you know? Do you think we used to get so much more out of that just in our system? Because if it seems like these things that you're speaking of are things that seem like necessities to our soul, you know?
They are.
Like nothing seems more thirsty these days than like our soul. Like whatever. There's like I almost can feel this part of underneath me a lot of times just almost like my soul is trying to order like Oxycons or something. It's like, dude, what am I even doing here anymore if these are the practices we're doing a lot of times? It's like you can start to feel it feels bored, you know, or it feels like thirsty. That's a better word. It doesn't feel bored, it feels thirsty.
Well, thirsty, and but it can vacillate between profound boredom and extreme anxiety. Like, so you get and by the way, thirst, that's the word that's actually used in the Buddhist scriptures for what's usually translated as desire. It's more like thirst and craving. It's not simple desire.
Yeah.
And that craving, when it's that reciprocal narrowing, it's identifying in a mindless fact. It's all that stuff we talk about. And I like the contrast, and I'm playing around with it in my mind. It's like we have to learn to not thirst because we properly nourish our souls. And when you get people to do these these 3 dimensions, view, care, action, and do DIME, you know, dialogical, imaginal, mindfulness, embodied, embedded, extended, enacted, all that stuff, emotional too, all the E's, right? And they do it not only individually, but collectively, right? Then people start to talk about that nourishment. And that nourishment, that's where the language, your soul is sort of your vehicle, your way of being profoundly connected, right? And sometimes people make a distinction between your soul is sort of how you're profoundly connected, like to your body and you're grounded, and then your spirit is how you're profoundly connected to that capacity for leaping into the sky, right? And then yourself is paradoxically how you're profoundly connected to other. We only become selves through other people. If you're raised in isolation, you don't become a self. You don't become a person. We become selves. We become selves by. I'm taking a perspective right now, right? And you're taking a perspective on my perspective. What a kid does, and this is like the Zorro, the imaginal. The kid, imaginally, not imaginatively, but imaginally, right? The kid will try and take on the perspective of the teacher or the parent. That's why, and they'll imitate them, right? And eventually they can imitate them to the point they indwell that parent's perspective, and then they imitate it more and more and more. And what that means is they start to be able to do that for themselves. They start to internalize that. And what does the parent's perspective have that the kid's perspective doesn't? The parent's perspective can see the biases that the kid's perspective has. The kid can't see it because they're in the bias, they're in the perspective. And the parent's perspective can also see broader, deeper goals that the kid's perspective can't see. And so this is by Vygotsky and other people's notions. By internalizing the perspective of the parent, they get a capacity to take a perspective on their own perspective taking. And that's how they start to become a self-aware agent. If you ask a 3-year-old, even a 3.5-year-old, what's going on in your head right now? They'll say blood. They can't introspect.
Oh yeah.
And I kept track of this with my younger son. It must be bad if your father is a cognitive scientist, but
oh yeah, the kid's not gonna be.
But I kept track of the first 2 times he introspected. He was 4 and a bit, and we were driving in the car, and he said, "Daddy, it's snowing outside, but only in my head." And
he's imagining it,
right? And he can introspect. He's got that interior imaginal space because there's no literal space inside your head.
Yeah.
And then the other time is he came up to me and he said, "I have a backwards camera in my head." And I went, "What? What does that mean?" And then I realized he was saying he has autobiographical memory. He can remember his past. And then this is great. I said to him, "Does anybody else have that?" And he said, "No, only me." Right? So we become capable of introspecting, reflecting on ourselves, correcting ourselves, transcending ourselves through other people. We become selves through each other. And so the soul is perhaps, I'm trying to rehabilitate these terms so we can re-inhabit them. And there's a connection between those two words, rehabilitate, re-inhabit, right? I'm trying to rehabilitate the notion of soul. This is how this is our deep connectedness to our embodiment, to our groundedness. Our self is our deep connectedness to each other. And our spirit is our deep connectedness to the vertical, to what is ultimate. And if we could bring those back so that they can be simultaneously scientifically understood, remember Socrates, and spiritually transformatively real for us again, then we can do that nourishment you were talking about.